Hey everybody, Jordan here with 9to5 Toys, and today we have the RTX 4060 Ti. Now the one we have here is an XLR8 from PNY. This is the 8GB version, also has RGB. And as you've probably heard from NVIDIA with the 4060 and 4060 Ti, there are going to be a few different models available at different pricing points. The base 4060 will be available in July for $300. The 8GB 4060 Ti is the first one to be available May 24th, today. The 4060 Ti 16GB is also going to be available in July, and this version that we have here, the XLR8 from PNY, is priced at $450 and will also be available because it is the 4060 Ti 8GB. And so it's great to have some cards that don't have that huge price point that we've been seeing from a lot of the 40 series from NVIDIA, but is this 8GB card worth it for the $450 price point? Well, let's dive in and check it out. Alright, and first off, let's run through some of the specs on the 4060 Ti. This is the PNY XLR8 4060 Ti 8GB, priced at $449. Has 8GB of GDDR6 RAM, base clock of 2.31 GHz, boost clock of 2.54 GHz, 4,352 CUDA cores with a 128-bit memory interface. DisplayPort 1.4a also supports the new AV1 Streaming codec, a TGP of 165 watts, and as far as dimensions, it's a 2-card slot, has a single 8-pin power connector, and it measures 12 by 4 by 1.5 inches. And we'll touch briefly on design here. You know, the XLR8 cards from PNY, they do fall a little bit more into that gamery kind of aesthetic. They have kind of intricate shrouds on them, and then also they have RGB. Thankfully, with the TGP of 165 watts, this is using just that single 8-pin connector, not one of the big beefy new NVIDIA connectors or multiple connectors. And despite it being a 3-fan card, it should fit well in most cases. It's a 2-slot card, and really the only dimension that might be of an issue is the length, which is 12 inches. And of course, as you can see, it fits fine right here in my NZXT H9 build. Actually, there's plenty of room in there because this is such a big, spacious case. Check out our build up here in the corner if you want to see that. Okay, and now let's dive right into some of the performance of this card and what I was getting in some real-world gaming. Thanks to NVIDIA's anti-aliasing, super resolution, and frame generation technology, the 4060 Ti can get some pretty impressive FPS numbers in Forza Horizon 5. Even with the graphics maxed out at 1440p resolution, I reached up to 94 FPS in the benchmark mode. And there are quite a few settings to tweak regarding NVIDIA DLSS settings. I found the best looking mode to have just the DLAA enabled with frame generation off, but FPS performance was lower at 66 frames per second. With frame generation turned on and AI super resolution enabled, which disables DLAA, the frame performance goes up to the mid-90s, but there was a little bit more visually slightly noticeable artifacts. Mainly I could see them on the power lines and poles that move against the sky and clouds. Overall, it's not that noticeable when I'm in the middle of a race, but when I am scanning a scene for issues, my eyes do pick those up. And one other note here, this is an 8GB card, and Forza Horizon 5 was the only title I played where I actually got a warning for low VRAM. At just 8GB, that might be of concern to some people, especially if you are a creative professional dealing in 3D or, you know, really intense illustrations. That's something that might actually cause some issues. So the 4060 Ti 16GB will be coming out a little bit later, and that might kind of push you towards something like that. But still, for gaming, I was pretty impressed with some of the numbers I was getting here on the 8GB version. I also saw better than expected numbers while playing Battlefield 2042 without changing any graphic settings from where I typically have the 4070 Ti that I usually use. I have all the graphics settings set to the max at 1440p and DLSS set to performance. With these same settings, I was getting 100 to 110 FPS even when playing Rush XL, which was one of the most chaotic and graphically challenged modes in the game, and also the best in my opinion. While the 130 FPS from the 4070 Ti is better than this, still being able to play at 1440p with max graphics and still get over 100 FPS on a card that is almost half the price of the 4070 Ti, that is pretty impressive to me. The 4060 Ti does start to show some of the performance difference when going to the Heaven benchmark. It's just a GPU intensive benchmarking test. The 4060 Ti was able to reach just 71.1 frames per second, while the 4070 we tested a little while ago got 100 200, and the 4070 Ti had a high score of 124 frames per second. I also tested the 4060 Ti and the 4070 Ti when rendering a effects-heavy sequence in Premiere Pro. The 4060 Ti was able to render the sequence in 4 minutes and 51 seconds, while the 4070 Ti that I typically use cranked it out in 3 minutes and 37 seconds. So once again, if you are a creative professional, you know, having a card that costs a little bit more upfront but saves you when it comes to actual time, you know, that is something that you might want to consider what you'll be using this video card for. But another benefit of the 4060 Ti and really the whole 40 series from NVIDIA is the AV1 codec for streaming. NVIDIA boasts that this gets up to, 40% better quality from the same bit rates. In actuality, for me, testing this, I could maybe see it looked a little bit better. It was hard for me to quantify it as like a 40% increase. At this point, AV1 is not supported by all streaming platforms and streaming software, but there are some that do. YouTube does support AV1 Streaming, and so does OBS, which is a popular streaming software. I typically use Streamlabs for my streams on the 9 to 5 Toys YouTube channel, but I quickly fired up a stream in OBS to see what kind of performance and what kind of visual difference using that new codec made. So while playing Battlefield 2042, I had the bitrate set to about 8,000, streaming in 1440p 60, and I could maybe see a little bit better performance when it comes to visual quality, but I feel like when you're still playing like a very fast-paced game with a lot of visual details, like Battlefield 2042, you still get some visual artifacts in there. And, once again, if you have a higher bitrate, that's just gonna do better, but this is what I was getting in my experience from my stream. I mean, really, I am just excited for this codec to be supported by more platforms. I'd love to use it in Streamlabs because I do think that it's gonna be the better choice. And then lastly, we'll talk about power consumption, as a smaller card with a TGP of 165 watts. If you are, concerned about how much power this card is going to be drawing, this one is a great choice, especially given some of those performance numbers compared to some of those bigger cards. While playing Battlefield 2042, it would typically draw between 115 and 120 watts. Moving on to some of the other cards we reviewed, the 4070 was pulling an average of 171 watts, while the 4070 Ti average was closer to 192 watts with a max of 203. So once again, I was surprised by the power that this draws and what kind of performance you could get compared to the power that was coming out of some of those bigger cards. So when it comes to just real world gaming performance, I was really surprised by how well the 4060 Ti did. Of course, having more frames does make a smoother gaming experience, so you really want to try to get the most out of your budget and what you can get. But if you are kind of limited, I do think that this performed better than expected when it comes to gaming. Once again, on the creative professional side, if you're doing a lot of video editing, if you're doing a lot of 3D or illustration, that VRAM might come into a little bit of a factor and be an issue there for you. You might want to go for something with a little bit more. But if your focus is primarily gaming, I was really surprised by what this could do. Now, considering that the RGB on this card, the PNY XLR8, is a little hard to control. I couldn't really get it to show up in the Velocity X app and make any changes. That's why it's still kind of this rainbow effect here. And that's something I've had with some other XLR8 cards in the past as well. Me personally, I would skip the RGB version and go for a non-RGB and save yourself 50 bucks there, and also save some headaches with trying to change the LED color. But that's going to do it for this look at the PNY XLR8 NVIDIA RTX 4060 Ti 8GB. Let us know what you think about it down in the comments below. And if you're looking for some other videos to watch, I'll link to our review of the 4070 as well as our most recent video. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up so others can find it easier and consider subscribing. This is Jordan with 9 to 5 Toys.